AllSides, and John Gable. Joan and John, thank you guys both so much for making the time today.
It's great to be here.
Pleasure to be here.
So, Joan, I want to start with you. You are the co-founder of moveon.org. You're a liberal political activist. You've also co-founded, I believe, momsrising.org and livingroomconversations.org. Tell me a little bit about, what you've been up to and everything from MoveOn to these other organizations.
Well, MoveOn I co-founded back in '98. That's last century. and that was during the impeachment scandal around Bill Clinton. And I'm a mediator by training and origin. And the attempt was to censure the president and move on to pressing issues facing the nation. And that was an appeal that was across the political spectrum because you could love Clinton or hate Clinton and agree that the best thing for the country was to censure and move on.
Right.
Unfortunately, the political polarization has gotten worse and worse. Moms Rising was founded with Kristen Ralph Finkbeiner in 2006, and it's about family economic security. It's because there's not actually a hatred of mothers so much as certain systemic problems that have caused the employment of mothers to the maternal profiling. If you are a mom, you are less likely to get hired, to get advancement. The real cost to motherhood is something that the data showed us. And so we wanted to turn that around. And that
you were ahead of your time on that, I think.
It's been a really good thing to have a lot of moms and kids showing up and saying, hey, healthcare is really important for us. And so is education. And so, it's a whole ecosystem, a system that needs to be supportive of families. And, so Moms Rising is not just for moms, it's for people that have moms, which happens to be just about everyone. But as, things progressed and the polarization continued to get more intense, Living Room Conversations is an opportunity for people to talk across differences and really discover how good people across the political spectrum are, and that everybody, and there was a whole book about this about a year ago, good, reasonable people. But where you live, your context has a lot to do with how you see the world. And when we talk to each other, we see each other's humanity and see that we have a lot of the same intentions. Right. And I, co-founded that in 2010. So it's been many years now where my objective is really to have us be a functional society where we actually work with each other to get what we all need, because what we're seeing right now is a wrecking ball going back and forth, and domination is not a long-term strategy. You can win for a while, but if you really want sustained progress, we need to do it together. And right. That's why I love John.
Well, okay, so let's get to John. John, you're the co-founder and CEO of AllSides.
Yes.
AllSides is I guess you call it a platform that promotes balanced news, media bias ratings, different diverse perspectives, civil conversation across divides. You grew up in small town Kentucky, which is interesting because, Joan, you grew up and are coming to us from Berkeley, California. So two places in this great country that probably couldn't be more different, at least in terms of politics, perhaps demographics, but you guys are very good friends, and you have been for a long time. But John, I want you to tell me what AllSides is in your words, so I don't butcher it.
Well, the mission is actually to free people from filter bubbles so they can better understand each other and the world. And so it's funny because Joan and I met, I don't know how many years ago. It's probably 9 years ago now, and it's interesting because she and I were focused on the same problem. For me, I go back to my time at Netscape, So I was, for those of you who are too young, Netscape Navigator was like the first popular web browser, kind of like a ChatGPT
Right.
for web browsing. And I was the lead product manager for Netscape Navigator. I joined Netscape in 1997. I gave a speech that year where I thought that the way information flows online would actually train us to discriminate against each other in new ways. And this is kind of, I believe, and the internet's done amazing things. It helps us to, the dream is we get to have better information, to make better decisions, that we get to meet people across great distances online and get to know them not as a stereotype, but as people.
Right.
But I'd read a book that's very popular in the news world. I don't know if you've read it, Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman.
I remember it, yeah.
Yeah, and that talked about how when the news moved from video, from the written word into TV, that it would pervert it. That would become entertainment and infotainment and kind of crap.
Right.
And
they were saying this about radio, too, 100 years ago, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I read that, and it was more about the medium that you communicate in changes what you say and how you say. And I even went farther and said it almost changes the way our brains think.
Sure.
Kind of like an athlete trains to hit a forehand really well. You're trained to think a certain way. And I thought the internet would train us to think in terms of metaphor. This is similar to that, which might lead to thinking in terms of stereotypes, which is a horrible foundational thinking that causes discrimination. Now we use the term that Eli Parser created, filter bubbles. And we now understand tribalism. But that scared me back in 97. And then so I've been watching it for a long, long time, and it evolved far beyond anything I ever thought. And then in 2012, my co-founder, Scott McDonald, and I were like, you know what? We have an idea of how to do this. We're going to change the flow of information so that people actually see multiple sides. That we're going to create technologies that could do that. Like Joan, I think we were a little bit ahead of time. In Silicon Valley, we talk about being on the bleeding edge. That's when you're too early for something. I like to joke that we were on the bloody stump side of the bleeding edge. We're way too early. But things have changed. There is a moment in history now where people are so fed up with the divisions and the extremes that they're actually looking to come together. And AllSides, we're starting in news, we're starting in politics, because that's where understanding is most needed. But frankly, it's needed in every walk of life in modern world. I mean, the problem today is we don't know what to believe anymore.
Right.
Or we believe things that aren't true or not entirely true. And so whether that's at on the society level, or even in businesses, or in families, or in schools, we're being used in all 50 states in schools, or pretty much any walk of life, this is a critical problem in society today. And AllSides is here to create the technologies and the platform and the place, but also we actually have more impact through our clients that we help understand all the perspectives. So we're not a ministry of truth that tells you what to think.
Right.
We're not an anarchy that's like, okay, whatever happens, which in that case, the people with a lot of money and a lot of power tend to manipulate it. But kind of like a balanced system of checks and balances, where you can see the different points of view and truly enable all of us to decide for ourselves. And what people miss is Joan's aspect of that. So I know a lot of technology people who think it's all about information. Well, it turns out that truth doesn't solve the problem of misinformation.
Right.
And
this was the idea. This was the utopian idea of Silicon Valley.
Exactly.
Information is supposed to be free. If you just put it out there, the rest will fall into place.
Yes. And what we've learned over time, and I at a certain level, I still believe that, but what we've learned over time is that system can be manipulated.
Right.
Frequently by the powerful people who are behind that technology and others.
Right.
Actually anybody who can manipulate it tends to manipulate it for themselves. Anybody who has too much power, that gets out of hand.
Sure.
And so what you need is kind of like what we did in governance. If you think about it, early on in societies, we went for dictatorships. That had some problems.
Right.
And then we went for kind of Athens-type direct democracy. That had problems too. And it became anarchy. And so what we developed was a democratic republic, a system of checks and balances that ensures every point of view is heard, every person is respected at some level. And that's essentially what AllSides is bringing to information. And it includes not just the bits, but the relationships. Right. And that's why Joan and I work together so closely, because she understands the value of the information. I understand the value of the relationship, because that's where human beings begin.
Right. And I should mention, Joan comes from a liberal background, co-founding moveon.org. Tell me a little bit about your, where you came from, other than your work at Netscape.
Well, I love talking at San Francisco, because I always when I talk on stage, I always introduce myself by saying, you'll love who I worked with in politics before, like Mitch McConnell. And you get people booing and hissing and whatever, and some laughing, fortunately. But yeah, back in the 80s, I was a moderate, lean right Republican professional.
Right.
Then I thought I should get a real job, and went to business school, ended up at Microsoft and on the original Office team, and then down in Silicon Valley for Netscape. And I actually found that we had more impact. I had personally more impact on the world for better by working in technology at Netscape than I did working in politics in DC.
Sure.
And that's just kind of where I'm more capable of helping people.
Right.
And so the idea, the vision that Joan and I totally are on the same page on, is making our free democratic republic work for the benefit of everybody. We are so tied there. And it is funny, when she and I did a TED Talk years ago, the biggest surprise was like, they're actually friends.
Right.
They don't seem to be faking it. It seems to be real. How is that possible?
Right.
And we are very good friends, and we are so dedicated to helping our nation and our people do better together. Right.
I want to go back to a term that both of you guys have used, the filter bubble. So I was telling John when we met earlier, when I was in grad school doing, wasting money basically 10 years ago, wasting my dad's money, I should say. I'm just kidding. I studied media management, and I did a thesis on sort of media literacy, and one of the books I read for that thesis, as sort of one of the primary sources, was this book called The Filter Bubble by Eli Pariser, who I believe was actually one of the co-founders of MoveOn. But Joan, all of that is to say, tell me, like I'm a child, what a filter bubble is.
A filter bubble is just the way in which where you live in the lab. I live in Berkeley, California. If I want to hang out with people that have conservative viewpoints, it's not easy for me. Online, if you've been identified by the technology as someone that's conservative or someone that's progressive, you're going to be fed the stories that make you feel like you're right. So the filter bubble is the space that we live in, both physically and online, that reinforces our beliefs and understanding. If you get a bunch of people that are conservative together talking about whatever topic, or progressive together talking about climate change, we reinforce each other's beliefs. We make each other, if possibly, even more extreme. And that's, kind of the science behind it. And one of the things we've seen is that if you tell someone something that doesn't fit with their worldview, it pretty much washes off. It's like water off a duck's back, unless you have a real relationship with them, which is why John and I, love working together, because it's once we have that relationship, we start really listening to each other's concerns with interest, and we, kind of get to the point where we can see a bigger, more complex picture, because human beings tend to want things to be simple. And I think I've gone beyond the filter bubble here, but the filter bubble is our starting place.
And the filter, what you were saying is the concept of a filter bubble isn't like it exists in the physical world, right? You see this with Democrat, to totally, oversimplify. Democrats live in cities, Republicans live in, small town suburbs and rural communities, which is not completely true, right? I live in New York City. I have plenty of Republican friends who live here. But by and large, that's sort of how we see things. But the filter bubble in technology, that's where it gets, to me, dangerous, because when you have the algorithms are going to put us into these bubbles, right? And they're just going to feed us stuff. that they know that we like, and they know that's going to anger us. Not even that we like, that we don't like, right? Because the stuff that angers us is the stuff that keeps us scrolling, and then it keeps these companies generating ad revenue. John, just talk to me a little bit about, how do you get out of that filter bubble on the internet?
There is lots of things to do for society, but as an individual, you can choose. But you have to work at it. It's a tough thing. And one of the things that our nation lacks is the ease, the opportunity to actually get out of their bubble and talk with other people. And there is a national health crisis, a mental health crisis on isolation. And this is directly connected.
Right.
Because if your relationships are only based on agreement and you have to fit a certain form, you don't have a deep relationship. And so it's interesting. The work that Joan and I are doing for Bridging to Help Society actually helps people mentally as individuals too. But this is actually one of the things we're doing with the National Roundtable coming up soon, is that we are giving people the opportunity to easily talk with people who are different.
Right.
And our goal is next year to have this every week on whatever topic it might be, and have them in local areas on school board issues or anything. But the key is having a technology system that makes it easy for anyone who just is curious about the other side or wants to hear the other side on an issue they care about. We just need to provide our nation that opportunity again, because we no longer have we're much more in filter bubbles. We're much more sorted now than we used to be.
Right.
Used to be at your local church or library or school, you'd have a broader mixture of points of view. Even then it wasn't great, but you also had you heard some of these other points of view.
You were out in the real world.
Yeah,
you were interacting with people.
And
right.
Then the mainstream media represented both sides a little bit more.
Right.
But now that's not the case. And if you can't talk across divides, the whole fabric of society that's necessary for a healthy, functioning democratic system is at risk.
Right.
And so Joan and I are changing that at scale so that people can actually connect with each other and actually get to know each other, realize that, okay, you're wrong about this, but you're not necessarily evil.
Right.
And we can solve something together.
So I would add to that.
Please, Joan, go ahead.
I would add to that, where we used to be able to talk about politics, we've seen so much bad behavior because the media tends to focus on the more sensational, that we become less able to talk about politics. And so even when we are in communities that have diversity of viewpoint, we don't talk about those political differences because it seems too scary. So the point of the living room conversation is to give people a really clear space where it's a container that has everyone agreeing to speak with respectfully, be curious, and take turns. And it's really a listening practice where people talk about their own relationship with the topic at hand. So you're not bringing up talking points for politics. You're talking about your own relationship with whatever the topic at hand is. And that's something people can listen to. And then it's just a reflection and next steps as we leave that. And what's beautiful about that is after a lot of conversations, people just stick around and then they get really deep and much asking the questions they haven't asked of each other. But you have to establish that trust in each other before you can get to these further conversations.
So you guys are both talking about this National Roundtable. Now, I did a poor job in sort of explaining what that is. John, tell me, the National Roundtable on Political Violence, we're doing this on November 6th. This is a co-production between AllSides and Newsweek. Tell me what the idea here is.
Well, what Joan just described is what we want to provide the nation. And it's actually difficult to do that in person. You have to find people, and it's very difficult to do that geographically. So we've been looking, and actually AllSides with Living Room Conversations has been testing ways to do that at huge scale. So tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands or millions of people eventually can actually connect with each other and actually have real, authentic conversations about things they care about. And Newsweek, kudos, has the courage to do that with us. And the first event is actually this coming Thursday, November 6th. And what happens, actually, it's not where you just kind of get online and watch people talk.
Right.
Everybody gets
It's not just a
online.
big Zoom call.
It's not a big Zoom call at all. It's because normally that's like a webinar, and you watch a couple of people talk to each other. That's fine.
Right.
I'm not knocking that. But what we really need to do is in conversation with each other. So even though we may have 10,000 people show up, we're expecting that kind of numbers to register. What happens when you show up is everybody's divided. They answer a couple of questions, and everybody's mixed into a small breakout group of 4 to 6 people, and it's a diverse group, politically diverse, age, gender, geography, so that the people in the room you're having a conversation with are different than you are. We actually call that mismatch at AllSides. It's like the world's worst dating app. We connect you with your opposite. Right. And but then with the magic of living room conversations guides, which we integrate in the interface, these 6 strangers just follow the steps. And we've done this, living room conversations, and we in different scenarios have done this, like 10,000 different conversations. And people have done this in the past. We tested the heck out of it.
Right. And
what we've noticed, and actually 2 of the pilots, we had like 88 and 92% of the people wanted to do it again. And what we've measured is that there's a change, that they really are transformative, that people become more open to the other person, to the other idea. And Fetzer Institute even did a test on some living room conversations done both online and in person. And they not only saw that change, but they saw it worked online if you see the person and hear the person. Not asynchronous trolling,
right,
but an actual real conversation in person.
Not somebody hiding behind some avatar on social media.
These are real people talking with real people.
People that could be your mom, your brother, your sister, your barber, right?
Exactly. And they even noticed, they even went back 2 months later and saw that the shift in people's perceptions, being open to other people and other ideas, had remained after 2 months, after just one conversation. So we see this as potentially transformative for our culture, that we're hoping that this first National Roundtable is the first of many to come, and not just at the national level, but local levels, because we as society need to talk with each other.
Badly.
Very badly. And right now, all the technology doesn't want you to do that. They want you to manipulate you to click or buy or think what they want you to think, and we're doing the opposite.
Yeah.
And we're doing the technology and the business models and the outreach and the partnerships
to
fill this huge unmet demand of people who want to have real conversations with people. We may be wired to divide, we may be wired to be tribal, but we're also wired to connect. And this is where we're leaning into in order for people to solve the real problems we face today.
Right. Joan, I want to go back to something you were saying. So I wrote I'm asking you this because I think we're sort of similar in that, I grew up in a liberal family from New York. I remember going to, I sort of became interested in politics in the Bush years, protesting against the war, going to MoveOn events as a college student. I don't particularly find myself at home with today's Democratic Party. That's a story for another day. But I'm interested. I'm interested in what they're up to. I'm interested in what the Republicans are doing, what Trump is doing in particular, trying to, create this relationship with young men online. But I wrote a column, it was almost a year ago now, in our 1600 newsletter. It was just after the election. Trump had won just before Thanksgiving. And I was begging readers, don't cast off your family members when you see them over the holidays over politics, right? If you're a Trump supporter and you're going back home and to a liberal family, don't turn politics into something that's going to get between the relationships in your life that are far more meaningful than any politician. I was shocked at the response I got to that column. I thought what I was writing was sort of common sense, and I still think about it because the response was overwhelmingly negative from the left, from people saying, how could you tell me that I need to talk to somebody who doesn't believe in X, Y, Z, or who could vote for somebody whose supporters stormed the Capitol. January 6th was something that regularly came up. Conservatives don't do this. At least in my experience, conservatives tend to want to hear more of the other side. That to me, that strikes me as something that's relatively new. And I'm curious, I'm asking you this, Joan, because I'm curious if you agree or if there's something that I'm not seeing. I don't know if it's just Trump. I don't know if it's, Trump has made everybody in this country insane for going on a decade now. But I think I'm asking you, is that a fair assessment of the left?
It's interesting when someone writes, typically they are the people that are most dissatisfied. So that doesn't
That's
surprise me.
true.
But when you say that, it makes me think, well, we've got a whole bridging movement that's, started living room conversations in 2010. And in the bridging movement, the there's been an imbalance with less people on the right showing up, especially Trump supporters. So my experience has been very different than that. It's,
Interesting.
It's interesting because I've been involved in the bridging movement as well, very much. And what I find is there are different groups trying to bridge divides.
Right.
And the folks who tend to lean more to nonprofits and government solutions tend to be more on the left side. And they get other people who are interested in bridging on the left side. So those are kind of what Joan's noticed in the bridging side. You have more representation on the left. There's also like a more general interest in conversation for conversation's sake on the left.
Right.
On the right, it's like, well, if I just want to feel good, I can go get a beer or get a massage. Why am I wasting my time just having a conversation? I want to do something with it.
Interesting, right.
And so one of the things that we've spent a lot of time, and actually in our earlier versions that we've tested this, we tested different messaging. And if you go to the world saying, let's just talk with each other, you get a lot of people on the left. If you begin with, like, let's talk about political violence or let's talk about an issue, you get people on the right as well. So you get a better balance that way. And it's very interesting because the way you invite people brings in a certain type. I mean, at AllSides, we're very proud that, like, in addition to our technology, we have a website at allsides.com. We get a lot of news coverage. We're like a mid-tier news organization. But we have an equal percentage of Democrats and Republicans coming to our site based on our last survey, and it's been like that for years. We tend to have a little bit more in the center, but we have an equal percentage. And part of that is that we don't just respect the different points of view, but we use the language of the different sides. And I think that most of the folks who are kind of nonprofit-oriented and kind of looking for big government solutions sometimes, or are all about, let's talk about it, but I don't know what's going to result from it. That tends to be a little bit more the left point of view, while the right point of view is like, what's going to be the result?
Right.
Are we really going to deal with the immigration crisis, or are we just going to talk about it and feel good about it and go do nothing about it? And so, but when you talk both languages, you bring them both together, and then you get real good groups. And I know groups on the right that say the same thing that Joan said. It's like, we can't get anybody from the left to show up, but we're trying to talk about these things. So it's kind of like, depends on where you go.
No, I think that, and I think, Joan, you made a really good point, which is that, the people who write into newsletters and the people who are most vocal online are the people who are angry. And the people who are angry right now are Democrats, right, are liberals. Those are the, they everything that happened last year with Biden, with Harris being subbed in, losing that election, what many Democrats would say was a totally winnable election. They're frustrated, and that's sort of like what I see, I think, in my emails. But I want to get back to, so we talked about sort of this the density divide, right? The divide in physical location, where Democrats live in cities, Republicans live in small towns. To oversimplify it, we talked about the filter bubble online. I'm fascinated by the divide in dating. I feel like I got out of I feel like I was probably the last, the last helicopter out of Saigon, and that I met my wife right before, the era of these dating apps, right? I feel, honestly, I just feel terrible for young people that they have to date in the current environment. But this is the latest. This is a poll from NPR Marist from March of this year. Majority of Americans under 45 say it's important to date or marry somebody who shares their political views. That's a preference that appears to matter less and less as you age. Among Gen Z and young millennials, so that would be 18 to 29-year-olds, 6 in 10 say it's important, compared to just a third of the boomers and being Americans over 60. So this is a self-reinforcing cycle, right? Let me play devil's advocate. Why is this a bad thing? Having a partner who shares your beliefs on very, basic issues, whether it's abortion or immigration or taxes, shouldn't that make the relationship stronger? Or what am I missing? John, you go first.
I love this stat. I've looked at this data in different ways over the years. And it used to be 20 years ago, where people wanted to marry into the same race.
Right.
That it was the bad thing was to marry somebody outside your race. Fortunately, we got over that.
Yeah.
And so that's very low on the surveys. But to replace it is I must marry somebody in my party. Now so you could make the argument about marrying cross race, different backgrounds or whatever. Back 20 years ago, it's more of a cultural difference. Right. But it's interesting to me that we replaced. Well, sometimes a lot of places the old discrimination still exists, but to some extent we replaced some old styles of discrimination and created new ones. I think your point about agreeing on important things in life is very important. That doesn't necessarily mean you're in the same political party or not.
Sure.
And so conflating the two, conflating who you vote for with your core values, that's a little bit of the danger part.
Right.
And so I know that that's hard for people who are caught up in politics, but like Joan and I, we seriously, deeply want to help our nation, want to help people understand each other. And that's the more fundamental belief than I think she and I probably disagree on Prop 50 in California coming up. Although I don't know what you think on that right now. But we're different politically and think that there are different solutions to the problems. But we do agree on a lot of the same problems and on the importance of solving them.
No, I mean that's always what Joan. What I always try and say in my newsletter is like, I have bias, right? I think everybody has some bias. I mean that's just part of being human, and I sort of lean a little bit to the left, but I'm also my bias is that I want my 4-year-old daughter to live in a country that is as good or better than I grew up in terms of our democracy, in terms of just our way of life, our ability to speak to each other. That's sort of like my own bias over anything else, right? Does that resonate with you?
Well, the reason I'm doing this is very much because of that. I think the challenge that we're facing now in the dating, I have never seen the polarization as bad as it is right now. I've never felt like the president is actively hostile towards anyone on the left in the way this particular president is. The sense of being invaded it's just kind of remarkable how there's a feeling that we're at risk. And so I can see where that would make dating across politics very dicey if you are involved in politics. I think there's also a huge number of people that have stepped away and said, I don't even want to look at it because things are so toxic.
Right.
And, what I dream of, because I think collectively what we want is a functional society where we can have differences and treat each other well and not be hostile towards one another. Can we create that center of gravity so that the polarized parts start coming in some and that there is a real attraction to being functional and caring together and doing things that we need to do? Because we have infrastructure, we have all sorts of ways that we can prosper if we're working together. And instead, there seems to be more focus on scoring points than on getting to a point of we can do things together.
Right. So, John, ostensibly we're here to talk about political violence. I mean, this is what the Roundtable is about. Yes. We haven't really touched on it. That's my own fault again. So the Charlie Kirk assassination on September 10th, to me that was a watershed moment. I didn't really agree with Charlie Kirk, but I did see him as an extraordinarily talented young man and just political organizer. He had amazing political talents. Also just, father of young children. The whole thing was horrible in every way. What I wrote and what I said after that was, this was an attack on all Americans. If you can't see that, if you can't get out of your own way, out of your, your hatred for President Trump or for MAGA or for whatever, and see that, a young man who was, as Ezra Klein wrote in the New York Times, practicing politics the right way,
Yes.
talking to people on campus, if you can't see that his, murder in front of those people was an attack on our very way of life, then it's very difficult to even continue the conversation, because it's like we're starting from almost like different realities. Now, and then, one of the conversation that I got in my emails and that we had in the newsletter after that was, well, is it, Democrats are the ones that are, causing the political violence, or no, it's Republicans. Republicans have always been the party of political violence. Look, I mean, to me, it's almost like the horseshoe theory. It's like when you're talking about the people who are actually committing horrific acts of, assassinations or violence against their political opponents. These are people who have been completely radicalized, whether they're coming from a far left perspective or a far right perspective. It's almost like when you're at that point, it's just too easy to put them into buckets.
Yes.
But at the same time, I don't want to, the person who allegedly killed Kirk appears to have come from a place of sort of leftist leaning. So I don't want to let the left off the hook, having this person just committed the highest profile political assassination in 80 years, and it appears to have been politically motivated. So this is like my struggle in talking about this. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, and I think we have to take a little bigger picture of how society's changing. So when Joan and I started our different organizations, and now we're work together so much, I remember in 2012, 2013, I went around to a lot of people explaining how tribalism and divisions was getting a lot worse. And I'd have to spend, I have a 30-minute meeting, I had to spend 25 minutes showing up charts and everything, how it's going to get worse and what we could do about it. And now if I spend more than 30 seconds on that, they're like, duh. But back then, at the end of the meeting, you could almost see them finally maybe getting it, and they're like saying, yeah, go enjoy your academic project. I have other things to do.
Right.
So there is a shift. I always make the comparison to addicts. If you really have an addict in your family or friend, the first stage is to admit you have a problem.
Right.
And so I think about 8 years ago or so, the nation began to realize it has a problem with this addictive of extremes. And they began to have that problem. They began to recognize it as a real problem. But then, kind of like an addict, the first step is to do something that doesn't work. It must be their fault.
Right.
It's a terrible problem that we're divided and hate each other, and it's their fault
right.
over
right.
there. And that's
my guys are the good guys. Your guys are the bad guys.
Those guys who are
right.
causing the problem, not us. It's them. And that's kind of like an addict saying, "Okay, I have a problem. I'll just drink after lunch."
Right.
It's their attempt, but it doesn't solve the problem. I think the big change that happened with that assassination, and there were Democrats assassinated before that.
The woman in I forget her name, Melissa Hortman in Minnesota. Yes.
And there's also church violence, which
Sure,
I
right.
put in the same category. In my
Absolutely.
mind. Horrendous, terrible things happening. I think now society's like, we got to really solve the problem, and now they're getting more serious about it. And that's why I think this is a change, a time in history that not only kicked off by that assassination where everybody sees, oh my gosh, we've gone too far. The people in politics are the last people to see it. The people in D.C. are the last people to see it. Frankly, the media sometimes, because they're so overwhelmed with people in D.C. and politics, it's sometimes harder for them to see it.
Right.
But if you look at data, my gosh, people are so fed up with that. They're looking for a change. And I actually think 2026 could be a watershed moment. Not only is society like, okay, there's a problem with these
We've gone too far here.
But there's also, it's the 250th anniversary of the nation.
Yeah.
You have all these organizations. Every time I go to another organization, there's somebody else who's on their own doing a national changing media literacy moment
Right.
and democracy learning moment about what it's like to get together and create our nation.
Right.
That, along with the 2026 campaigns, which are going to be crazy, gives us a moment of opportunity to change things. I truly, seriously believe, practically speaking, the number of people we can reach Joan and I and bridging organizations and smart news organizations covering both sides like Newsweek can actually have an opportunity to shift the nation just enough so that we can actually take power away from the angry extremes and start getting to solving problems. And I'll go through all the numbers if you want, but this is a real tangible opportunity that we can execute, that we can actually make happen. And I think the time is actually, we really are at that time in history, but it's for us to choose.
I feel you there. It does feel like we're at a hinge point in the moment. Right. I mean, I guess everybody always thinks that they're living in the most important time in history. But this one...
But it happens a lot. The 60s.
Yeah, right.
You could consider the early 80s the same kind of thing. We keep having these things.
Well, okay. So I'm going to talk to you guys more. Go ahead, Joan.
So the assassinations that have happened this year are very, very visible and horrific. There's other political violence that we will also be able to talk about in this political violence in the community, because there are a lot of people that won't run for school board anymore or won't help with the polls. So, I think locally people have to take ownership, and they can. That's where we all have power, is locally, and create the expectations that we treat people that are in public service with respect and hopefully appreciation, so that there are really good people I would like to see running for school board and helping at the polls, that they are quiet, gentle people, and they don't want to put their families at risk. They don't want to be fearful. How do we create the kind of society we want to live in? And that's what we're inviting people to think about together, and recognize that, in fact, we're very much on the same page, wanting that kind of society.
Joan, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because honestly, one of the first things after Charlie Kirk was killed that went through my mind was, what is this going to mean for the people who are the next Charlie Kirks? I don't mean him specifically, but the people who, who have a political talent that they could bring to this country, who are going to say to themselves, you know what? I don't want to go anywhere near this. It's too toxic. And I don't just mean political activists and, organizers. I mean, just what you're saying, right? People, school board members, poll workers, local mayors, right? How many teenagers out there right now who are the next JFK or Bill Clinton or Ronald Reagan politically are going to go into, finance or tech, because they're going to say, politics? Are you kidding me? I don't want to go anywhere near that. It could get me killed.
And it's ugly. And it's not just the killed, it's the threats, it's the, we need to be treating people the way we want to be treated. How do we create a culture of respect? That's what I want to have us modeling at every
and healthy disagreement.
Right.
So
yes,
we don't necessarily, and Joan and I talk about this a lot. She says this a lot, and so I'm just adding to something she frequently says, is we need to be able to disagree and disagree better.
Right. So
it's not a matter of us all holding hands and singing Kumbaya or Coke is the world or whatever that old commercial was, but Coca-Cola. But it's actually disagreeing. I mean, I was at a bridging retreat with some other organizations was that 2 weeks ago? And we were a block away from, we were in Philadelphia, a block away from Independence Hall, where the Second Constitutional Congress that created our Constitution happened. It was not a pleasant conversation inside there.
Right.
They did argue. They did disagree loudly.
Right.
But
it was surrounded by a Revolutionary War.
Yeah, it was a little scary time.
Exactly.
I mean, we're pretty safe, relatively speaking. But they all believed in a common purpose. And so, though I do want to have more civil conversations, I'm actually concerned that people interpret that to being agreeing and being nice all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, and I've actually was involved in politics, and I've been in families that are attacked even, decades ago when it wasn't anything like this. And I was always have a personal disgust with how easy society, whether it's other political organizations or activists or press, are so easy to destroy people's lives because they're in politics. It's always bothered me tremendously. But at the same time, we also need a little media literacy where we understand that there are different points of view and we disagree and we can disagree with each other. And that's a good thing.
Right.
Not something to be afraid of and avoid. Just like in a family. If you're in a marriage and you two are afraid to talk about something, that is how the marriage breaks down.
It's insidious.
So we are in a marriage in the United States
Right.
with each other are over great differences. The Ken Burns special, I just saw a preview that your guys are putting together on that, is serious differences. We've always had serious differences. But we need to be able to talk with them and actually remind ourselves of our common purpose.
Right.
And if you have that, you can have that respect.
That's the foundation.
Yeah,
So I want
that
to
is
add
the
to
foundation
this.
that makes it possible.
Please,
Yeah.
Joan.
So one of my favorite conversation guides is healthy conflict. Healthy conflict is actually really the best kind of way of learning and getting better at things. In a business, healthy business, good businesses know conflict is human. And if you have conflict in a way that's generative, you get better answers. You get, better relationships too. So we don't want to not have conflict, but we want to have conflict in a way that honors each other's intelligence and humanity and finds our, we have a lot of shared values. And when we build upon those, we can see that, oh, well, this is more complex. There are tensions that we need to navigate, and we'll always have to navigate because it's not we have freedom or safety. We need both, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this, a democracy is an ongoing project. There isn't a day in which it all comes together, right? I guess except for the day in Philadelphia.
Well, that's one of many days to follow.
Right.
Yes.
All right. Well, I want to let you guys go. I'm going to be talking to you both again at the National Roundtable on Thursday, and I will put the link to that in the description, and I'll also promote that on the newsletter so everyone can join if they want. My final question to you both, and Joan, I want to start with you. It's a simple question. Are you optimistic or are you pessimistic about the future of this country?
I will give myself hopeful.
I'll take it.
It depends on how we show up.
John?
I'm actually more optimistic than I was 10 years ago.
Really?
Because I felt that 10 years ago, it's like algorithms. Everybody understands the problem now. I thought they were horrendously dangerous 10 years ago, but nobody knew the problem.
Right.
So I have a little longer view of it. And I think we have to go through this uncomfortable period of time to get to a better place. But I'm not blindly optimistic.
Sure.
We have to make that happen. We look at history at times when the nation could have gone left or right. We look at other nations that were divided and did not succeed but failed. And the differences between those nations that got together and solved their problems and didn't was actually this middle group that actually talked to different sides and had the conversations. You always have the extremists yelling at each other. If you don't have that other voice, the Martin Luther Kings of that time, or the other kinds of voices that actually did talk to different sides, then that's when things go bad. So United States freedom and democracy and health is not guaranteed. But I'm more optimistic that we could solve it because now we're actually becoming aware of the actual core problem underneath it all.
Right. This is Ben Franklin's quote. It's a republic if you can keep it,
Yes.
right? Joan Blades and John Gable, thank you guys both so much for joining for this really important conversation, I think. And I will see you on the roundtable.
Thank you so much. See you then.
Looking forward to it.